Hello and welcome to the Black Robe podcast. I'm Carol Mitchell, your host for this evening, actually your co-host, because I finally have Miss Tia Harris Dalton. Put your head up, baby girl. She is finally in front of the camera. I am so happy for you all to see her, along with Ms. Monique Patterson, who is one of my co-conspirators, collaborators, partner in the work of social justice, especially for families in the child welfare system. Tonight, we want to talk about one of the barriers, and we may have a whole series of conversations around the barriers that we see to a thriving Black family. I've been on a whole kick lately about Black families and being well and dealing with our issues. And so I want to talk about this barrier called housing and housing stability. And Monique has a great background as a housing advocate, as a housing navigator, as a housing case manager, as a transitional housing program. Lots of good information and experience with it. So welcome, Monique. And Tia is going to talk about her experience just as a person in search of housing and what that experience is like and how difficult it can be and some of the barriers that come along with it. And then what I will do is talk a little bit about fair housing and housing discrimination and how that is also a factor and how income discrimination is still alive and well. You know, where your money comes from is not supposed to be an issue, but people still be looking to see. So, Monique, why don't you start us out with just talking a little bit about Next Chapter and the work that you do to get people housed and keep them housed?
Yeah, so Next Chapter is a emergency shelter / transitional housing program, and we help single mothers with children, single pregnant mothers with children become self-sufficient. We also have a branch from that, and we help single dads and families outside of our shelter program become housed and stay housed by giving them continued support and case management for the life of their lease. So we work on all of the barriers to housing, such as their criminal history, their credit report, income, education, all of those components. We really dig deep in their history in order to change their future, has been our motto since we started Next Chapter.
Yeah, so I'm glad to hear that you're branching out and providing the service for men because, you know, houselessness, housing instability is not gender specific, it's not racially specific. Although I'm wondering, who do you see crossing your threshold most? Are there any demographic themes that you see? What kind of folks?
Yeah, we primarily serve people of color. We have, and it's been that way since, I would say, 2019. That has been our demographics of the BIPOC communities and Indigenous families.
Why do you think it's Black and brown families that you see most often? What's up with that?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is how we were raised. A lot of the families I come across don't believe in bank accounts, don't believe in credit. And it is okay because it was their norm to couch surf. They always lived at an auntie's house, or they always slept at grandma's house. It was normal to those families to sleep in a motel. If they were housed, it was very temporary, meaning like 3 months or 9 months, and then they went back to an auntie or cousin's house, etc. Never had a bank account. They always kept money under the mattress. Very stereotypical, but that was their everyday life. And so we kind of mold them into a different way of living, like getting a bank account, getting a driver's license, etc., to change that generational curse, as we call it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have a paper trail. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember having that conversation with my son-in-law that look, you need a paper trail, bro. You need, you need something other than just the Department of Corrections number
Right.
as part of your paper trail. You need to show some income and some wages with your social security number attached
Right.
to it, right?
Absolutely.
You need some life insurance. You got three
Mhm.
babies and a wife, bro. You better get some life insurance. And
Yes.
yes, a bank account. Tia, what about your experience? I mean, some of us had two parents or one good parent and a roof over our heads all the time, and you are very well educated, smart, talented, professional person. So what kind of challenges have you faced though with trying to find quality, affordable housing in Tacoma Pierce County?
Income limits has always been kind of an issue for me. I mean, a good deal of my time down here was spent as a student in the beginning when I moved back down here from Bellingham. And when you're a student, at least kind of at that time, that's a ding against you automatically with the assumption that, oh, well, you're a college student, so you're having parties, you're having keggers, there's lots of traffic. No, at least that's not me anyway. As a college student, I was a very serious college student for most of it. Um, so yeah, I would say income was the biggest barrier. Sometimes making sure it was centrally located towards the sources that I needed. So making sure there was a grocery store that was close by in case I didn't have a car for access, or at the very minimum, a corner store to go towards,
Hmm.
in emergencies. So those are always kind of little things that I've looked for as an adult, living on my own, is how close am I to the resources that I'm going to need. And sometimes that's a barrier. Sometimes the lowest cost of living you can find is, you got to travel over I-5 to get to a grocery store, and automatically I'm thinking the Tillicum neighborhood, right?
Hmm.
So those are just a couple of things that posed issues for me.
Yeah, you might find housing, affordable housing out here in the back 40, but if you don't have a car, you can't get to where the jobs are. The closest bus, if you live out here, I call it the back 40. If you live out in East Pierce County, where a lot of the new housing and the growth is happening, you can't get a bus going
Mhm.
east and west. You can forget it. Maybe the Route 4 coming out of Puyallup across 112th Street will get you to Lakewood. The Route 1 will get you from Mountain Highway down Pacific Avenue over to TCC, but there's not much in between those two. So transportation is a big factor in where people live. Monique, Tia talked a little bit about income. How does that create a barrier for your clients, and how do you overcome it? Because I know you have a really good track record of getting people placed.
Yes. So we do a lot of budgeting. We even budget their SNAP benefits down to the dollar so that we have carryover for the next month. We help them retrain their brain that food stamps is just not free money. It's actual money, because one day you will not have um that cushion. So we have to treat it a little bit differently. A lot of these rental units are 2.5 to 3 times the rent. So what does that look like? And a lot of families say, well, I make, $15 an hour. I can afford no more than 1,600 a month. When in reality, that 2.5 to 3 times the rent, then they would only be able to afford 800 to 900 a month. And that is
Hmm.
very hard to find. There is some units out there, but again, it's not what they're looking for. And they want flexibility. So on a bus line, or it has to have a washer and dryer. It has to be on the bottom floor, or it can't be a secured building. A lot of our families' standards are extremely high, and they just don't meet that income marker. Or
I'm having a little trouble. I mean, I do understand why people have high standards and that they want to live in have nice things and living in nice surroundings.
True.
But if you're coming out of your car, which some of our clients are frankly living unhoused, they're living in their cars, or hopefully not in a tent, but they don't have a stable place. What's realistic to expect? Maybe let's just ask, if their expectations are too high, then what would be a realistic expectation for, let's say, a family of 3? What's a realistic expectation, and where is the affordable housing that you've been able to find people? Where is it located in the city?
Well, affordable housing, let's argue that. What is considered affordable housing? Are we talking about income-based housing where there's a cutoff? You have to meet like no more than 80% of the AMI, or are we talking about a 2-bedroom apartment that's no more than $1,700? So I guess it depends on that particular family. What does affordable housing look like to them?
Less than 30% of your income.
Well, some of those 30% less than your income units can be in those high rises on the waterfront. They can be in a luxury apartment complex, but there's only a certain time of the year that those units are available, and they go really, really quickly, because a lot of these units are in what they call opportunity zones. So they already get a tax break, and they have to have so many units that are considered affordable housing in order for them to continue to get those breaks for the next 30 years. So again, it all depends on where you want to live, what school district you want your children to live in. Are you willing to give up a washer and dryer for a 3rd-story unit, or a 2nd-story unit, or 1st-floor unit? What are you willing to give up as part of your wants and needs? What are you willing to sacrifice?
Tia, what were you willing to sacrifice to get? I mean, I'm following Monique very closely, because I think there's something to that, that we have to be realistic about what we can afford. And I'm using affordability as, no more than 30% of your income. I'm just using that. Now, some people would say 50%. Well, fine. If you want to be stretched financially, then go to 50%. But even at that, given our level, our average income, right, what you have to make in order to be able to afford to live in Pierce County, I think the last numbers I saw, Tia and Monique, was like $62,000 a year. And so if you're not making $62,000 a year, you're going to have some affordability problems trying to get everything you want. So what did you have to sacrifice, Tia? Anything?
Really, at the end of the day, and of course hindsight being 2020, not that much. But I think a lot of that was because I was very persistent. Anyone who was willing to give me like verbal resources of where to go or who to talk to or what complex would be more willing to work with my situation, I pursued those leads. Like when I ended up moving out of my last apartment, which was actually just down the street from the college I was going to at the time, like there was access to a washer and dryer, but the cost was like exorbitant. So like if you look at, say you've got maybe 4 loads of laundry, some of that is including bedding and stuff, you add that up over the cost of a month and you're already working and getting an income of less than paycheck to paycheck, which as a student at the time I was, there's not really a whole lot of room to stretch. So one of the things that I looked for when I pursued the place that I moved to afterwards was that it had a washer and dryer, because that made the most sense for my life. $25 extra on my electric bill is better than the $30 to $40 I'm spending per month trying to do laundry, having to carry that down, the amount of time that takes, you know, like, what's your time worth? So that's also something that I considered in that.
And folks stealing your stuff when you
Yeah,
you
that
put your
too.
stuff in the dryer and you come back,
Yeah, that
all
too.
your good sweaters are gone. But so Monique, though, I think the underlying message from you is you need to have realistic expectations about what you can get for the money. And credit history is a big barrier
It
for
is.
people. In fact, I hear that is more often the reason people get turned down than income.
Right. Right. Because they, a lot of these property owners rely on your credit score to kind of give them an indication that you are able to pay your bills on time all the time. So if you have a 400 or 300 credit score, then they know that there is a possibility that you will be behind in your rent. And if they lower their criteria, meaning instead of 3 times the rent, they go down to 2 times the rent. Well, they want your credit score to be at least 680 in order to get approved. Or if they even look past that, then they still require first month's, last month's deposit plus an additional deposit. So you'll end
And
up.
what I mean, come on, who can come up with that kind of money?
They're not even looking at rental credit. They're literally just looking at if you had a
At
credit
credit
card, did you pay your
score.
phone bill on time? Like, I can attest to that. My credit score has been as low as like 500 at one point, but my rental history has always been 850 or whatever the highest level of that is. Like, it's one of the things that my mom drilled into me. She said, anybody will feed you, but not everybody will give you a roof to stay under. So make sure you take care of that.
Pay your rent.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you can. Well, what's credit? Like, the meaning of credit is the ability to pay for something over time. So if you can do that every single month, then we know for sure that you're going to be able to pay your rent every single month, because you're going to do that time and time and time and time again.
And so Monique, what does Next Chapter do to try to help your clients who probably mostly have difficult credit histories? You know, there might be some things on their credit report that are getting in the way. What do you do to help them overcome that?
So we start working on their credit. We start updating addresses, number one, updating their demographics. And then we start sending out letters to the credit bureaus, to the creditors that they owe, and we help them negotiate anything that is owed, especially if it's to a previous housing provider. So we negotiate that. I just did it 2 days ago. I did a lot of things 2 days ago on a Sunday. I negotiated an old landlord's bill, and it was for $2,500. It was 3 years old, and I got it down to $350. It's a payment. $350. They sent it off, paid it immediately, and then today we applied for her a home, and she was approved today. So something
Excellent.
simple. We have to tackle our history, because gosh, it'll hold you back and hold you back. And even at the 7-year mark, they will resell it to someone else, and then it's like it's a whole new debt. But again,
and so credit history, income,
yes,
rental history as a subset of credit history. I guess I'm wondering, Why don't people just do their best to buy a house?
Well, that takes time. And either way, they still have to work on their credit. All of their other barriers just to for rentals, they have to do for a mortgage too, and then some. So it's if they do not, then it'll be very, very hard. They'll get a high APR. Their mortgage will be way, way more than their rent. It won't be as easy. Plus, on top of that, they have more bills. They'll have water, sewer, garbage,
Right.
um, electricity, all of those things that is pretty much a luxury with apartment complexes because we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about maintenance of the yard. We don't have to
Mm-hmm.
worry about if something breaks down. And if our families do not have the income now, then they're just going to go into foreclosure. And that's what
Yeah,
we want to prevent.
I do. I'm very much aware of, I've had clients, probably have some now, who all the way back to the grandparents, nobody ever owned a house.
Right.
And
We could do it.
when we think about how generational wealth gets passed along,
Hmm.
the house is the primary. There's life insurance, but a house and the equity in the house and in the land,
Hmm.
those are primary sources of wealth. And we live in a country where housing is so racialized, access to that type of wealth,
Hmm.
redlining and blue lining that
Hmm.
goes on, and disinvestment in certain communities or gentrification
Hmm.
where they make it impossible for families of color to
Hmm.
get that generational wealth to pass along. So I know there's work we need to do to get credit scores up, get income up, so people can buy a crib, a house,
Yeah. Yeah.
and actually their equity. What do you think about, and Tia, I want maybe you start and respond to this. What do you think about shared housing, where you got a roommate or a business partner that you just sort of go in together to do something, to rent a space or buy a space? What do you think about that, Tia? And then Monique.
I kind of think it's the way of the future. Just kind of looking at carrying capacity, if you will, of the housing that's available, plus the fact that wages have been stagnant for decades at this point. Like, in order to even have a roof over your head, there may not be another choice but to room with someone. Again, I don't think anything is wrong with it. You do what you have to do. You do what's best for you. But I think that that's where we're heading if some things don't change.
Mm-hmm. Monique, what do you think about that? Roommates.
Oh, see, listen, I have 7 little roommates
Yeah.
that live here rent free. So I, I feel some type of way about roommates, but let's just call it shared housing.
Shared housing.
Yes. I think I mean, unfortunately, that's the way we're gonna have to. That's the direction that we're going. There is a lot of opportunities with shared housing right now. That's not being utilized. We have some of our elders in the community who are offering some of their space because their spouse passed away last year or the year before that, and they have this huge Victorian style home on the north end with 7 or 8 rooms, and it's just them.
Mm-hmm.
And no one wants to utilize that option because it's shared housing. So again, we have to look at our priorities, right? Because it's not going to be forever. It's only a temporary time that you have to go through this. And that'll give you some time to save, work on all of your barriers. And then the next year, you can come back and you can live wherever you want. I just did it
Mm-hmm.
for a client of Next Chapters. We found her housing. She still had some things to work on. It wasn't her first pick for housing in Puyallup, She stayed there for a year. We continued to work with her. And then this year, she applied to her dream townhome and was approved. And she is happy and living her best life.
Yay.
But she had to spend 12 months sacrificing to save to be able to live in this beautiful townhome with 2 little kids just by herself. So
It is a sacrifice. It might be hard to believe, but you know, I'm one of those generations, my generation, the housing prices were such that, you know, at 19, I could buy my first house because it was only $48,000.
right,
Right. But what 19-year-old can do that today, which is why I guess I go back to each generation, the preceding generation, you know, having that asset to be able to pass along to the next one. Because frankly, that's how people with wealth, that's how they do it. They pass their wealth on to the next generation so that they don't have to start from scratch.
True.
And racism in housing has kept a lot of Black and brown families from being able to do that. But I think part of it is also setting our sights higher. And like you said, building up to it, right? You may not have the 3-bedroom house, you know, with the white picket fence right out of the gate. But if you work on your credit score, increase your capacity to earn, so you're increasing your wealth so that you can save more and maybe get that down payment saved so that you don't have, you know, mortgage insurance, private mortgage insurance, and higher interest rates. You can kind of buy all of that down because you got a bigger down payment. That's about income. Now, let's talk about that for just a second.
Yeah.
How much money have your clients got when they go looking for these apartments? Do they have any money, or do they have vouchers? What's the income situation like?
Yeah, it varies. We do a lot of savings at Next Chapter. So some of them have income, some of them have housing vouchers. A lot of times I'll reach out to other organizations that have rapid rehousing funding to help secure those costs, because it is expensive and it is a risk, especially if they have a lot of barriers that we're still working through. So because of that, I kind of put Next Chapter on the line time and time again, like, hey, we're here. We're going to stick with them. Like, do you want us to co-sign for 6 months? What do you need us to do to get them housed so that we can start to change the cycle? And with those clients, we have been extremely successful. And I'll do a time and
Co-signing. Ooh, co-signing. So you're basically saying you'll pay the rent if they don't.
So they can get housed. If that's what I've done it like 3 times now. Next Chapter has just so our families can get housed. That's how dedicated we are. And they have been housed and they're still housed. Longer their co-signer, and they are doing remarkable.
Excellent. So sometimes they just need that initial help to get in, and then they demonstrate that they have the capacity to pay and build that rental history and that credit history. I'm wondering about, you know, Tia, I know with you live alone.
Come to my house.
You know, there are these, and we ain't gonna tell people where you live, so there, because we know she's fine, and y'all will be showing up at her door, knocking on her door, and all that. We're not gonna have that, but I'm curious about the voucher system, because Monique, have we had any additional vouchers added? It seems to be like the waiting list for vouchers is like 5 to 7 years. I've known people said they've been waiting years to get a voucher. So, uh, what was your experience, Tia? Did you have any luck at all? Were you, I mean, and a lot of folks don't qualify for the voucher. I heard somebody today, I was at the United Way uh, Poverty to Possibilities conference, and uh, one of the speakers talked about being $30 over, right? She made $30 more than what the limit was for her to be able to get assistance with what she needed. And so sometimes just those little thresholds, the cutoffs, you almost feel like it's designed to keep people in poverty. Tia, what's your experience with that?
Well, so I hopped on the list for THA back in, I think it was 2015. Yeah, it was 2015. And it's interesting because at the time that I did it, I didn't need it. I was working for Google Maps. The income was good. The commute was horrible, but the income was decent. And my intuition said just in case, because I knew it wasn't a full-time, like long-term job, full-time for a short period of time, and how that can kind of get you caught in this cycle financially. So like you get a job with a certain amount of income, right? And you do okay, but if you haven't had a job, you're constantly playing catch up to get ahead. So then by the time you catch up, that job has now ended and you're basically back where you started. And I recognize that pattern then. So I just went ahead and went for it, figured, if it comes up and I don't need it, I'll just pass that on to someone else who needs it. And if it does come up when I need it, then it's a good thing I applied for it. And I ended up actually needing to take advantage of that. And if I hadn't had that, my butt would have been out on the street, like literally sleeping under a bridge.
But even having the voucher, Monique, you got to find the place, right? So
Correct.
we have a shortage of housing stock. And then fortunately, Tia, you found a place that would work with you and your rental history and credit history and everything else. But housing stock, you got to actually find a place. I'm understanding that people can't even find a place, Monique. What about that?
Yeah, it's difficult because there's a lot of red tape with these housing vouchers. They have to pass inspection, and if they don't pass inspection, then they have to do the repairs, and then they have to wait for another inspection. So it takes some time. It's not just like you apply, you're accepted, and you can move in on your move-in date. These clients apply, then they have to get accepted, and then they have to wait for housing to do all of their paperwork, etc., and then the walkthrough, and then the inspection, and then you get a move-in date. So it takes a lot of time, and frankly, a lot of these housing providers, they don't want to do it anymore. COVID has played a big part in that. Because this was the first time, at least in my lifetime, that everyone was so close to homelessness, and everyone struggled with the same issues: no work, not enough food, not enough resources. Mental health was playing a big part of that. And then we have others who took full advantage of this and just didn't pay, and they didn't skip a beat in their pay. And so all of these landlords, or housing providers is what we're supposed to call them these days, they became less trusting and started pulling out.
Yeah,
So
I heard that, especially the small ones. If
yeah,
you're a big conglomerate, maybe you can afford, or you'll pick it up on the back end in the future what you lost. But if you're a small, let's say you got 3 houses
yeah,
and ain't nobody paying rent, now all of a sudden you got 4 mortgages to pay with your own.
yep.
You can understand why they just don't want to do it.
Yeah, there's I sit on this committee for the city of Tacoma, and we're rewriting the rental laws in the city of Tacoma, and it is not favorable for landlords. It's
Yeah,
more
I know it
favorable.
ain't in Tacoma because
And
they basically want rent control.
yes, yeah, and I often get shut down because I'm like, wait, we can't do that. But um, but it's been fun. I've been on this group, on this committee for about a year now, and it never gets old to me. So
What about
um,
government housing? Because it seems to me like government as the housing provider should be able, I mean, it's part of their ethical duty to
mhm,
house people. So private landlords, to me, they're in it to make money. They're in
right,
it
right,
to generate wealth so they can, guess what, pass that wealth down to their children and grandchildren.
mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm,
it's almost unrealistic to expect them to be in it just for the altruistic, reasons of making sure people are housed. That's a governmental responsibility.
true.
So, what do we need to do to get the government of Pierce County and city of Tacoma and state of Washington to build some more affordable housing or some more low income housing for folks?
So would that look like Shalishan?
It could. The
So
new Salishan, not the old one.
right. So we'll have newer Shalishans. And so I guess in the South, they call it the projects. Those are all government type housing, primarily with people of color, and it's poverty stricken.
Yeah,
So
I
do
think that the key is you gotta have variety in there, like over there
mhm,
in Salishan, and I went to a development in Chicago where you couldn't tell which ones were privately owned and which ones were government subsidized because they were
right,
all mixed in. The
correct.
building had both market rate housing and low income housing in the same building.
And you couldn't
And so
tell.
you couldn't tell, and
Hmm.
that's how you mitigate the chances of having the projects because folks with
Hmm.
money are living in there too.
Right, right. I think one day we'll get there.
We need to take a trip to Chicago and see
Yeah,
how
I
they
want to go.
how they do it,
Yeah.
how they do it there. Because yeah, I saw a whole documentary on it that, it's the reason you end up with a project is because you have one income bracket living there. And so you
Hmm.
really have to have mixed incomes. If you got a 60 unit complex, maybe 20 or 80% AMI and 20
Yeah.
or 60% AMI and 20 are market rate or whatever, so that
Yeah.
you get a nice mix. Because the
Hmm.
real world is mixed incomes.
Right,
It
We have
also
right,
all
could
people
prevent
from high to low, right?
right,
it would also
right.
prevent the rapid intentional disinvestment that sometimes happens with these communities when it is mixed income,
Mm-hmm.
because of the assumption that someone who's living, at or beneath the poverty level, oh well, they're just going to take what I give them. Whereas someone who is able to, I guess, pay their own or who doesn't need that assistance, they're going to have a harder time disinvesting in that community because those people tend to speak up louder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we have to close, but this has been a powerful first conversation about housing. And I would love to talk more about, get some more housing providers to speak on their experience because I know there are those tenants who do tear the place up, cause a ruckus. One of my daughters is a property manager up in Renton, and she calls sometimes with the real property managers of Renton. That's what we call it. It's a reality show with
Hmm.
some of her tenants. There are people who fit the stereotype of a really bad tenant
They do.
and who mess it up for a whole lot of other folks who
Mhm.
just want to come and have a peaceful, quiet place to live and raise their kids and rest after working. So I know there's another side to that story. I appreciate everything you do. Monique, where can people find more information about Next Chapter?
www.nextchapterwa.org.
Thank you so very much. You got any vacancies over there for women over 60?
No, not yet. We're working on it. We just got another building, so I'm excited. Oh, and yeah, I'm excited about our new building because it's 13 more rooms.
Tell us about your fundraiser.
Yes,
Oh,
and you have a fundraiser coming up.
I do have a fundraiser at 1625 Tacoma Ave on November 29th from 11 to 1:30. It's free to get in. Please come and hear some great stories from some of our clients with Next Chapter and IBJ. Yeah, let's see.
How much are the tickets and where do they?
The tickets are free, so you can register on the website that I told you about. It is on Giving Tuesday, so if you feel generous, please give that day to Next Chapter and or IBJ.
Love it. Well, thank you so very much, Monique, again, and
Thank you
for the great work that you and your team, Tiffany and Carol, and of course our Peggy, who's not here tonight, and Tia and Candace, all of you who have direct hands-on responsibility and support for the families that come through Next Chapter. We really appreciate your great work. Tia, any final comments that you want to share before we close?
I guess for anyone who's listening who happens to be going through this, ask around, open your mouth, because there are people who they have resources, they know of people that may be able to help you. And if you are on the other side of the fence and you're a landlord and you're listening to this and you know that something needs to be done, open your mouth, talk to people. There are resources out there that'll help you help change how this is in our county.
Call me. Let's have a conversation.
Call Monique.
What's your phone number, Monique?
253-310-6290. Please call me.
All right. And on that note, I'm Carol Mitchell, hosting tonight's Black Robe podcast along with Tia Harris Dalton and Monique Patterson of Next Chapter. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.